All righty. Well, thank you all for coming this evening for my debut as a storyteller. My name is Patricia Tatich, and my story is titled Lessons from the Farm. I always admired my father and his ability to be a persuasive individual, hopeful, optimistic, that he was able to convince my mother to move from the city to a family farm that he was about to purchase. So they took a ride one Sunday afternoon. My father was always great for peach rides and ice cream jaunts. So he took my mother to the family farm. I don't actually think that she had seen it before that day. And he drove slow. Well, for the first time he went kind of speeded by. Then the next time he kind of went slowly. He was trying to give her the best possible perspective that he could. And she didn't say too much. But she does say this about that day when she was shown the property. I wonder when the lawnmower broke. And those buildings, that house, the barn, the outbuildings, it's going to take more than a coat of paint to restore them to their prominence and their usefulness. My father and mother purchased the property, and he always wanted to restore the farm to its former beauty and usefulness and all that it had to offer. My mother wasn't so sure about that, but with all the shortfalls of that property, it had an incredible redeeming quality. It stood on a hilltop in a terrific pastoral setting overlooking the Susquehanna River Valley. Central New York, the mountains of the Pennsylvania were the backdrop to the valley. And it was a special place. It was a place during the early 1900s where immigrants from Europe came to find jobs with the bookbinders, the cigar factories, the shoe factories. It was famous for Endicott Johnson shoes. And it was such a special place that the workers from the Endicott Johnson Corporation erected two large stone arches, one in Binghamton and one in Endicott, and the main street threaded the communities in between. And on those stone arches were the words, "Home of the Square Deal." So when the immigrants came, they knew they had arrived when they went underneath the arch. And that place, they knew, would accept them for all that they were and all that they weren't. So as time went on, and my parents had this farm, my father had visions of grandeur. And I remember seeing copies. I don't know how often the publication arrived, but there were hundreds of copies. Successful farming. I thought, we all wondered what would happen because they had wonderful photos of large farms that covered, that were far larger than ours, that had animals, gardens, chickens. They had everything. Now, my father was a hobbyist farmer. He worked full-time as an engineering technician for IBM. And that farm was his passion. And we saw with each issue that arrived, more animals arrived. Now, I must tell you that in the universe of hobby farms, this is small. It's 17 acres small. So we often wondered, like, when will this end? How large will the garden be? How many Black Angus would arrive? How many chickens? A few pigs. And he finally caved in to my request for a pony. Yes, a little white pony named Frosty. So that pony I had for a number of years, and it was a great attraction for my siblings and I. Particularly, we had no shortage of friends, no shortage of classmates who, at the drop of a hat, would accept an invitation to come on a Saturday. I would see them, the doors would fling open when their parents arrived in that Pontiac with the big fins. They'd fly to the door, and you knew that their day of fun and adventure was about to begin at our farm. We did not disappoint. We had an opportunity to have our friends be up close and personal with large bovine, with nasty roosters that would chase you around the yard. We would have, with the tomatoes that were overripe, there were a few tomato fights, later in the summer in the garden. But the best thing we did was enter into what we called Dad's equipment and junkyard, as my mother used to like to say. That's where all the equipment that we had on the farm, and we never had a new piece, that's where it went when it no longer functioned. Parts, maybe it'll get fixed, maybe it won't get fixed. But it was like an adventure land. You could go up on seats, you could crawl inside. Those were all the pieces of equipment that made a 3-hour job a 15-hour job, because they never worked. So we got to show our friends life on the farm, and it was a good time to be young and to be on that farm. My father was at work. My mother was head of the household. She was in charge of all the chores that my father left on a list as long as my arm to be done by the time he arrived from work at 4 o'clock before our family meal. And she was the main arbiter of all the disputes between the siblings. So she had an important job. And on the farm, you always were very cognizant of time and activities, because animals need to be fed. The seasons for planting, there was times to bring in the hay. And her favorite expression was, when we started to complain about things to do, we make hay when the rain shines, when the sun shines. Well, we always knew that something might change as we grew older, and we left to go to college, then left for a job. And I do remember that time after graduation ceremonies that I announced sheepishly to my parents, well, I've accepted a job in Glens Falls, New York. Glens Falls, New York. Yes, I'm going to go work for an architect, and I'm going to be a planner. A planner. So my father almost half heard me when I talked about planning and what they do and how they're involved in communities and how they help them and whatever. But he made this proclamation. He goes, Patricia, I've done some research. I found in the phone book, in the yellow pages, planner/city. He goes, it's right after pizza restaurants and before Plumber. At that moment, I thought, I have a long ways to go to describe to him my career and what I do. So after that time, I moved to Glens Falls. That was in well, it was a long time ago. We'll just leave it at that. And I was fortunate to be able to have a number of projects that brought me close to a number of people who had a variety of, jobs. They had farms. I was introduced to Washington County and how I could, to weave my way through the back hills and the farms. I was loving it. I was loving it so much that I made a lot of acquaintances. And in 1973, the convergence of the stars and the people that I had met who were farmers, downtown business people, people who were market enthusiasts like myself that maybe had a bit of farming experience. We met with city officials, and that year, the Glens Falls Farmers Market was born. So, it was a great thing for our community. Business people were happy. There were people coming downtown to reestablish accounts that have long been, left aside. There were in 1973 there were a lot of empty stores in downtown Glens Falls. Why go to downtown? But they would come down for the market. So 4 years later, the market continues on. It was wonderful. I enjoyed it. It was a reflection of everything that I learned about growing up, and the people were simpatico with our ideas. Well, the person who was supposed to be market manager got ill, needed an operation. And they kind of looked around. They said, we need somebody to be market manager for the summer. And all of a sudden I realized there were eyes on me. It's like, all right, I'm not sure I'm ready for this because, I don't think I'm ready. I'm not a farmer. I don't grow vegetables. I just buy yours. So they said, no, you're good. You're good. You can deal with the city officials. You can have them help us what we need, get what we need to have our, to have this market on. So they said, all right. It took a little bit of convincing, but it worked out all right. And the first market was held on Exchange Street. Exchange Street is that strip of land between what is now Davidson Brothers and the downtown social was Exchange Street. And the city was kind enough to allow us to use the bandstand that they had for Memorial Day parades. And so I thought, how are we going to move this? Farmers, no problem. They took their biggest kids and other people who were kind of burly guys who clearly wrestled or played football, and they moved this gigantic thing, prominent right in the middle of Exchange Street. That we had a gigantic banner. It was like wonderful. So as the market went on, it was clear that we need entertainment. There's not enough entertainment. People there just don't want to come for vegetables. They want to be entertained. Okay. So a gentleman from, a farmer from Washington County stepped up and said, I can bring beefalo. Okay, these are big animals. So I said, okay, well, what, he was introduced to me. I was manager of the market. I said, well, what will you need? Well, some fencing would be good, and I'll bring the hay, and they're pretty docile, and they follow me all around, so they'll be all right. Okay. So we carved out a spot strategically located that if anything went awry, we got them trapped. So the day that they came, so did the fencing from the DPW. it was snow fencing. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen snow fencing, but you could probably push it over with, 1 foot. I go, there is, if things don't go right, they could just like push their way through. Well, they were okay, except that people started to like feed them. They would pull hay and say, here. And the next thing you knew, a young man tapped me on the shoulder and goes, ma'am, the beefalo have pushed the fence over and they're headed towards Glen Street. So I kind of went into panic mode, but I thought, no, stay calm, stay calm. Where is the owner? That was my first question. Where is the owner? They were out of sight, but I did see a group gathering at the bandstand, and they're laughing. So I go rushing down, and what do I see? I see this mother cow and her calf chewing their way as fast as they could eat it, the flower boxes that have just been planted by all the merchants. They mowed those things clear down to the nubble that they came out of the ground at. I went, finally, by the grace of God, the owner shows up, and he goes, don't worry. So he walks around him, he taps him out. He had a little bit of grain in his hand. They followed him back, and they went right back to his truck. Thank you, Jesus, I escaped another one. Well, the next several weeks later, we had a man come to the market. He called up, and we had rules. Homemade, homegrown. You could be in the market. This is how much it costs. He says, well, I got fish. What kind of fish? Trout. Well, where are they alive? He goes, of course they're alive. So he comes with his truck, and he had this elaborate system with all these trout in them. They were probably 12 inches long. They'd certainly filleted fit into a frying pan. So I said, okay, and I'm thinking to myself, ag and markets, live animals being butchered, a live, animal being butchered. I don't know. This could take down the market. So he set up his table. His wife was there. She had all this professional wrapping paper. And the fish are all swimming around. He'd reach in, grab somebody to order trout. He'd reach in, flop it on the table, big cleaver, off with their head. Then off with the tail. The fillet knife went through that fish like butter. Filleted, hands it to his wife. She neatly wraps it and hands it to the purchaser. I looked into the group. I saw mothers covering their kids' eyes. I saw people aghast. And then I saw other people just laughing and just being highly entertained. Who knew this was entertainment? They're buying fish. Apparently they've never seen a fish. They'd never bought fish, clearly. So yet another time, I escaped the wrath of ag and markets. I thought to myself, how long could this last? The following couple weeks later, now it's like August. I'm thinking, another couple months. The market ends in October. I'll be home free. Please. So there was a man who came to the market, and a lot of people, farmers talk. They know each other's stuff. They know who's got tomatoes, who's got this, who's got that, and they really know who bought their tomatoes commercially. So this woman comes to me and she says, you're the market manager, correct? I go, yes, I am, for this summer, for this season. I wanted it clear. It was a definite time period. She said, Well, I just want to point out that that man is selling tomatoes from a commercial market in Manans. I go, oh, I'll go check it out. So I go up and I'm thinking like, I'm not remembering who rented that stall. I go up, oh, I found out who it was. It was the man who owns Sutton's Market. Like he was, for those of you who may not know, Sutton started off as a fruit and vegetable stand, and he wasn't necessarily liked by a lot of people. Big, tall guy. I went up to him. I said, sir, I said, it's been brought to my attention that your tomatoes were not homegrown, at least by you. He goes, what are you talking about? I go, those tomatoes. He goes, those right there? I go, yes. Those ones that are individually sized perfectly in that cardboard container on a flat, clearly bought at a market. I said, well, as market manager, I must let you know, you either remove the tomatoes for sale or I have to remove you from the market. And at that moment, I'm thinking to myself, this is why God gave me this big body. I could stand up to this large man, this tall, he's like towering man. And he said, so you're going to throw me out? I go, no, I'm asking you nicely to take your tomatoes and put them in the truck. I know you sell them at your stand and you could stay. So at this point in time, we're about, like 10 inches nose to nose from each other. He says, and like everybody is standing off to the side while me, and they're going, what will happen? And I didn't back down. He took his tomatoes away and he never came back to the market. And I think actually people were relieved because they figured that we're going to have to there'll be times when things always get brought to the market that are not homemade or homegrown. So at the end of that particular year, I figured I dodged a lot of bullets. And I got a lot of compliments from folks who were happy that I took the job, and I was so grateful that year had ended. And I often thought, as I always take a stroll on the opening day of each market year, and it's been running for 50 years last year, 50 years, I thought, well, it's pretty notable. I'd always take a stroll down Glen Street, and I always come up Glen Street, and I go down Exchange Street, and I remember that day, that summer, when the bison started to take a walk, when fish heads went flying, and I stood my ground to a person who might have been seen as like a bully purveyor. And as I walked towards the new market, now on South Street, and that in my heart, I believe that the time at home and the family farm, with everything that wandered away and all the things that occurred, that was my training for that summer, and it made me smile. Thank you.